The morning sunlight, usually a welcome caress, felt like an interrogation lamp today, stark and unforgiving as it sliced through the kitchen window. It illuminated every dust mote dancing in the air, every microscopic imperfection on the polished countertop, and most acutely, the subtle tremor in my hand as I lifted my coffee cup. The ceramic felt warm, almost too warm, a small, consistent heat against my palm that did little to thaw the glacial chill that had settled deep within my chest. He was still asleep, or at least I assumed he was. The rhythmic sound of his breathing, once a comforting lullaby, now felt like a cruel deception, a symphony of blissful ignorance that grated against my raw nerves. I traced the rim of the mug with my thumb, the silence of the house pressing in on me, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't a peaceful silence, the kind we used to share, filled with unspoken understanding and the quiet hum of shared lives. No, this was a silence pregnant with unspoken words, with secrets, with a betrayal so profound, it felt like a physical weight crushing the air from my lungs. It had started subtly, these shifts. A new cologne, faint at first, then more pronounced. Not quite his usual scent, but something sharper, more modern. Late nights that stretched into early mornings, explained away with vague anecdotes about demanding projects or unforeseen deadlines. His phone, once a casual fixture on the kitchen table, now guarded, face down, taken to the bathroom, always within arm's reach. I remember the first time I felt that prickle of unease, a tiny, almost imperceptible whisper of doubt. It was a Tuesday, 2 months ago. He'd come home past midnight, smelling faintly of something sweet and unfamiliar, like lilies and a hint of expensive soap. He kissed my forehead, a perfunctory gesture, his eyes already heavy with sleep, or so I'd thought. "Rough night?" I'd mumbled, half asleep myself. "You have no idea," he'd replied, his voice a little too quick, a little too light. The next morning, I'd found a single long strand of dark hair on his jacket. Not mine. Not the rich auburn of my own. I'd stared at it for a long time, turning it over in my fingers, telling myself it was nothing, a stray from a colleague, a random Klingon from a crowded elevator. But the image of that dark, silken thread had woven itself into the fabric of my subconscious, a tiny, persistent snag. The coffee grew cold. I pushed the mug away, a sight of the still, dark liquid mirroring the stagnation I felt within myself. I walked to the living room window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peer out at the street. The world outside was oblivious. A woman walked her dog, her pace brisk and purposeful. A delivery truck rumbled past, its engine a low growl. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, promising a clear but uninspired day. Everything was moving, continuing, while I felt suspended, caught in a moment of perpetual dread. My mind replayed the last few weeks, dissecting every interaction, every glance, every word. His sudden interest in new restaurants, places we'd never discussed trying together. His distracted air during our conversations, his eyes often drifting, as if seeing something beyond me, beyond the present moment. The way he'd started to flinch almost imperceptibly when I reached for his hand, or when I leaned in for a spontaneous kiss. Each one of these small deviations, once dismissed as minor quirks or signs of stress, now coalesced into a damning pattern. It was like watching a time-lapse video of a flower wilting. The transformation was subtle at first, then undeniable, then complete. Yesterday, the dam had broken. I'd been tidying the office, a task I usually left to him, but a sudden surge of nervous energy had propelled me into action. His laptop was open on the desk, left unattended, a rare oversight. My eyes, drawn by an invisible current, had landed on the corner of the screen, where a messaging app notification glowed. A name I didn't recognize, followed by a snippet of text. "Can't wait to see you tonight. Missed you." My breath had caught in my throat, a sharp, painful gasp. The world had gone silent, then roared back with a deafening cacophony. I hadn't even consciously read the words. They had simply imprinted themselves onto my brain, searing a permanent mark. My fingers had trembled as I'd hovered over the trackpad, a battle raging within me. The instinct to know, to confirm the sickening dread, fought against a primal urge to recoil, to unknow, to preserve the fragile illusion that was rapidly crumbling. For a moment, I'd been paralyzed, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Then, with a resolve born of pure terror, I'd clicked. The chat window had opened, revealing a string of messages, playful emojis, terms of endearment I'd once thought were exclusively ours. Plans for clandestine meetings, expressions of longing, a shared intimacy that felt like a knife twisting in my gut. My vision had blurred, tears welling up, hot and stinging, but I hadn't looked away. I couldn't. I needed to see it all, to let the full force of the truth wash over me, even if it drowned me. The woman's name was Sarah. Her profile picture showed a smiling face, youthful, vibrant, with eyes that sparkled with an innocent joy. A stark contrast to my own reflection, haggard and hollow-eyed. My fingers had grazed the keyboard, wanting to type, to scream, to demand answers from this virtual stranger, but I'd stopped myself. This wasn't her fault, not entirely. This was his doing. This was our shattered world. I had closed the laptop, gently, as if handling a fragile piece of glass, and retreated to the bedroom, the silence of the house now feeling like a shroud. I remember lying on our bed, the sheets still rumpled from our shared sleep, the faint scent of him still clinging to the fabric. It was a smell that used to bring me comfort, security. Now it was just another reminder of the lie. I had stared at the ceiling, at the familiar cracks and patterns, trying to find some anchor, some point of stability, in a world that had suddenly tilted on its axis. My mind raced, then stalled, then raced again, a relentless loop of questions with no answers. How long? Why? Was it me? What did I do wrong? The tears came then, a silent deluge, hot and ceaseless, soaking the pillow. My body shook with quiet sobs, each one tearing at the carefully constructed facade of my life. He had come home an hour later, oblivious, humming a tune as he entered the bedroom. He'd found me there, curled into a ball, my face buried in the pillow. "Everything all right, love?" he'd asked, his voice laced with concern, a concern that now felt like a grotesque mockery. I couldn't speak. The words were lodged in my throat, a bitter, metallic taste on my tongue. He'd sat on the edge of the bed, his hand reaching out to touch my shoulder. I'd flinched, a sharp, involuntary movement, pulling away as if his touch burned. He'd paused, his head suspended in the air, a flicker at something unreadable in his eyes. Confusion? Guilt? I couldn't tell. I still can't. I have a headache. I managed to croak, the lie tasting like ash. He'd nodded, seemingly accepting, and then, to my astonishment, he'd started making dinner. The sounds of pots and pans clanking from the kitchen, a surreal counterpoint to the earthquake that had just ripped through my life. We'd eaten in silence, the food tasting like sawdust, his tearful attempts at conversation falling flat in the chasm that had opened between us. I'd watched him, really watched him, for the first time in a long time. The way his brow furrowed when he concentrated, the slight curl of his lip when he smiled, the familiar gestures that were now overlaid with a new, terrifying filter. He was a stranger, a man I thought I knew, but who had harbored a secret life, a secret self, completely hidden from me. The next few days were a blur of forced normalcy. I went to work, performed my duties with a robotic efficiency, my mind a million miles away. My colleagues commented on my pallor, on the dark circles under my eyes. "Stressful week?" they'd ask, their concern a gentle prod against my carefully constructed wall. "Just tired," I'd reply, the lie becoming easier with each repetition. Each morning, I'd wake up with a fresh wave of nausea, the knowledge of the heavy stone in my stomach. Each night, I'd lie beside him, the physical proximity a torture, his innocent touch now feeling like a violation. I started driving aimlessly after work. The car became my sanctuary, a moving capsule where I could finally let down my guard. The rumble of the engine, the passing scenery, the anonymity of the road, these things offered a strange comfort. One evening, I found myself parked at the edge of a quiet lake, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. The water was still, reflecting the dying light like a broken mirror. I watched a lone duck glide across the surface, leaving barely a ripple. Its serenity was a stark contrast to the storm raging inside me. I thought about our wedding day, the joy, the promises, the absolute certainty of forever. I remembered his eyes, sparkling with love as he'd recited his vows, pledging his fidelity, his devotion. Were those words just empty air? Was it all a performance? The memories, once cherished, now felt tainted, poisoned. It was as if someone had gone back in time and subtly altered every happy moment, injecting a dose of cynicism, a bitter aftertaste. Our shared laughter, our quiet evenings, our future plans, they all felt like illusions, carefully crafted deceptions. The betrayal wasn't just about the physical act, though that was devastating enough. It was the deceit, the lies, the elaborate charade he must have maintained. It was the theft of our shared history, the erosion of trust, the shattering of the very foundation of our life together. How could I ever look at him the same way? How could I ever believe anything he said? The image of Sarah's smiling face kept slashing in my mind, a constant torment. What did she have that I didn't? Was she younger, more exciting? Did she make him laugh in a way I no longer could? I hated myself for these questions, for the insecurity they unearthed, but I couldn't stop them. I sat there until the stars began to prickle through the deepening twilight, a million distant lights indifferent to my pain. The air grew cold, raising goosebumps on my arms, but I didn't move. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were observing my own suffering from a distance. It was a coping mechanism, I knew, a way for my mind to protect itself from the sheer overwhelming force of the grief. Coming home was always the hardest part. The familiar sight of our house, the warm glow of the lights, the expectation of his presence, it all felt like a trap. I would walk through the door, offer a strained smile, and resume the charade. We'd talk about our gaze, about mundane things, about plans for the weekend. Each word felt hollow, each interaction a performance. I found myself scrutinizing his every move, searching for clues, for signs of remorse, for any indication that he was struggling with his deception. But he seemed perfectly normal, perfectly content, and that in itself was a fresh wound. One evening, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. My eyes were dull, my skin pale, my lips pressed into a thin, grim line. I looked tired, but it was more than just physical exhaustion. It was the exhaustion of carrying a secret, of constantly being on guard, of living a lie within a lie. I remembered a time when I used to look at myself and see joy, confidence, a spark. Now all I saw was a ghost of that woman, haunted by a betrayal she couldn't yet articulate. The silence in the bedroom at night was the most profound. Lying next to him, the vast expanse of the bed felt like an ocean separating us, an unbridgeable chasm. I would listen to his breathing, regular and deep, and imagine him with her, imagine the words he'd whispered, the promises he'd made. My imagination, once a source of creativity and joy, had become a cruel instrument of torture. I wanted to shake him, to scream at him, to demand to know how he could lie so easily, how he could betray everything we had built. But the words remained trapped, a suffocating knot in my throat. What would I say? How would I even begin? And what would be the cost of finally speaking the truth? I started taking longer walks in the park, finding solace in the rustling leaves, the chirping birds, the simple rhythm of nature. It was a world untouched by human deceit, a world that offered a brief respite from the turmoil within. I'd watch children playing, their laughter ringing freely, and feel a pang of longing for that lost innocence, that unburdened joy. I wondered if I would ever feel that way again. The question of why gnawed at me relentlessly. Was it a moment of weakness, a fleeting infatuation, or was it something deeper, a fundamental flaw in our relationship, in him, in me? I replayed our arguments, our disagreements, searching for a trigger, a point where things might have gone wrong. But nothing seemed to fit the magnitude of this betrayal. We had always been good at communicating, or so I had thought. We had weathered storms, celebrated triumphs, built a life together brick by painstaking brick. And now it felt like he had taken a sledgehammer to the very foundation. I found myself revisiting old photographs, images of us laughing, holding hands, looking into each other's eyes with such undeniable love. Each picture was a fresh stab to the heart. The smiles seemed hollow now, the gazes filled with an irony I hadn't perceived then. Was I blind? Had I missed the signs all along? Or was he just this master of deception? Thought that the man I had loved and trusted implicitly could be so duplicitous? Was almost as devastating as the infidelity itself? It shattered my perception of reality, of human nature, of my own judgment. The house, once a haven, now felt like a prison. Every object, every corner held a memory, a ghost of what we once were. The couch, where we'd spent countless evenings, curled up together. The kitchen, where we'd cooked meals, sharing stories and laughter. The bedroom, the most intimate space, now tainted by the knowledge of his secret life. It was all still there, physically unchanged, but emotionally it was a wasteland. The silence grew heavier. I noticed that I was talking less, laughing less, retreating further into myself. My friends called, concerned, but I offered vague excuses, unable to articulate the enormity of what I was carrying. How do you tell someone that your entire world has just imploded, but you're still forced to live in the wreckage, pretending it's all perfectly fine? How do you explain the unique agony of knowing, but not being able to speak, of being trapped in a silent scream? Sometimes I would catch him looking at me, a fleeting glance, almost as if he were trying to gauge my mood, my thoughts. I would quickly look away, afraid that my eyes would betray the storm raging within me. I wondered if he felt any guilt, any remorse, or was he just relieved that I hadn't confronted him, that he could continue his double life unhindered. The uncertainty was a constant torment, a festering wound that refused to heal. I began to question everything, my own memories, my sense of self, my worth. Was I not enough? Was I lacking in some fundamental way that drove him to seek solace and excitement elsewhere? These thoughts were toxic, insidious, eating away at my confidence at the very core of who I was. I knew intellectually that his choices were his own, that his infidelity was a reflection of his character, not mine. But emotionally, it was impossible to separate myself from the blame, from the gnawing feeling of inadequacy. The quiet moments were the worst. Sitting alone in the garden, watching the slow dance of a butterfly, this stillness would amplify the chaos in my mind. The taste of morning tea, the warmth of a blanket on a cool evening, the scent of fresh rain. These simple pleasures were now dulled, muted by the constant thrum of pain. It was as if a filter had been placed over my life, draining it of its vibrancy, its joy, its very essence. I found myself driving past Sarah's address, a quiet street with manicured lawns and neat houses. I didn't stop, just drove by slowly, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw a car in the driveway, a small, practical sedan, and imagined him inside, laughing, sharing secrets, creating new memories, while I was left with the shattered fragments of our past. The urge to confront her, to demand answers, was strong, but I resisted. It wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't undo the betrayal. It would only add more pain, more ugliness to an already unbearable situation. The thought of leaving him, of ending it all, would surface occasionally, a desperate plea for escape. But then, the weight of our shared life, the intertwined finances, the years invested, the sheer logistical nightmare of untangling two lives would push it back down. And beneath that, a deeper fear. The fear of being alone, of facing an uncertain future, of admitting defeat. It was a terrifying prospect, almost as terrifying as continuing to live this lie. I started to notice details I had never paid attention to before. The way the light caught the dust motes on the windowsill, the faint scent of old paper from the books on the shelf, the intricate pattern of the wallpaper. It was as if my senses had become hyper-alert, trying to find some tangible reality in a world that felt increasingly unreal. I was observing everything but experiencing nothing. The days bled into weeks, each one a carbon copy of the last. The same forced smiles, the same polite conversations, the same suffocating silence in the evenings. I felt like an actress in a play I hadn't auditioned for, reciting lines I didn't believe, performing a role that was slowly but surely consuming me. The emotional toll was immense. My body felt heavy, my movements slow, as if I were wading through thick mud. Sleep offered little respite, often interrupted by vivid, disturbing dreams that left me more exhausted than when I'd gone to bed. One afternoon, I was in the grocery store, pushing my cart through the aisles, my mind adrift. I saw a couple, young and clearly in love, laughing as they picked out vegetables. The man put his arm around the woman, pulling her close, a tender, spontaneous gesture. A sharp pang of envy, raw and unexpected, pierced through me. I remembered when we were like that, when our love felt effortless and abundant. Now, that memory felt like a relic from a distant past, belonging to two different people. I picked up a bag of apples, their smooth, cool skin a small anchor in the storm. I wondered if he still thought of me, of us, when he was with her. Did he ever feel a flicker of guilt, a pang of remorse for the life he was so carelessly dismantling? Or was I simply a forgotten chapter, a comfortable habit he was ready to discard? The thought was unbearable, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over me. Driving home, the sky had turned a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of rain. The wipers on my windshield worked rhythmically, clearing the droplets that splattered across the glass. But they couldn't clear the fog from my mind. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, a desperate attempt to hold onto something solid, something real. The radio was playing a slow, melancholy song, its lyrics about lost love and regret. I didn't change the station. I let the sorrowful melody watch over me, a soundtrack to my own quiet despair. I pulled into our driveway. The familiar silhouette of the house standing stark against the darkening sky. A single light glowed in the living room, a beacon of false warmth. I sat there for a long moment, the engine idling, the soft hum a counterpoint to the racing thoughts in my head. They looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror again, my eyes still shadowed, but something else was there now, a faint glint of something akin to resolve. The cane was still there, a constant throbbing ache. The betrayal was still a gaping wound, but beneath it all, a tiny, almost imperceptible seed of something new was beginning to sprout. It was the realization that I couldn't continue like this, living in this limbo, this endless charade. The truth, however devastating, needed to be faced. The future, however uncertain, needed to be confronted. I didn't know what I would say, or when I would say it, or what the consequences would be. But I knew, with a quiet certainty that surprised even myself, that the silence, the pretense, had to end. The rain began to fall, soft and persistent, washing over the car, washing over the world. I took a deep, shuddering breath, turned off the engine, and stepped out into the cool, damp evening, ready to face whatever came next.